I'd like to say something about addiction, mental health, and how we can all be happy, but in order to do that, I'd first like to tell you about what happens when herds of sheep feed on clover. So bear with me. Now, it appears that most plants actually produce a certain amount of foliage just for animals and insects to feed upon. It really depends on, which plant we're talking about here, but as a general average, I think it works out to be about 18% of the overall foliage of most plants is actually allocated for that purpose, for feeding other creatures. But obviously, when they eat too much and it becomes excessive, the plants begin to synthesize certain protective compounds within themselves that aim at actually reducing the number of creatures that are feeding on them. In many parts of the world, sheep love to forage on clover, but clover actually interferes with the reproductive cycles of sheep that feed too heavily on them. The clover produces estrogen compounds that reduce the overall fertility of the herd by about 70%. But the plant fluctuates the amounts of these compounds depending on the time of year or the volume of the sheep that are foraging it. But once the number of sheep is at a sustainable number, the clover's production of estrogen compounds will decrease. So it's regulating the population of the sheep while it's also preserving itself. In response to overfeeding by aphids, some plants release an aromatic volatile oil that's actually identical to the aphid's own alarm pheromone that signals immediate danger from approaching predators. So the plant's actually tricking the aphids into just upping and leaving, even though there's actually no imminent danger at all. Many plants can tell exactly which kind of predator is feeding on them by analyzing their saliva. And they can respond to that in a number of different ways. They can produce certain toxic chemicals or just foul-tasting chemicals, or they can release these aromatic phytochemicals into the surrounding atmosphere and attract the predators of that particular species. And of course, once the initial threat of these feeders, once their population is sufficiently decreased, the plant's production of all of these kind of phytochemicals is likewise going to decrease. Some plants actually produce medicine in response to the creatures that are feeding on it. For example, an animal might be grazing on a particular species of plant, and that plant can analyze the saliva of that animal and read through the saliva that the animal is carrying some kind of disease. In response to that, it can start to synthesize medicinal compounds that are specifically an antidote to that particular type of pathology within the animal. So when the animal comes back around to feed again, it's actually going to be receiving some medicine. And this can also, be done in plant communities. So a plant may need certain phytochemicals that it doesn't have or can't synthesize within its own body, and so it can send out signals through the mycelial network in the soil and actually communicate with other plants within that community, and they can basically nutrient share. So as a community, they can start to create medicine to actually heal other members of that ecosystem. So what's the point in telling you all this, and what's it got to do with mental health and happiness? Well, I think it's actually very interesting how nature self-regulates by allowing and perhaps even enjoying a certain degree of predation and destruction in the name of nourishment, nurture, and balance. But if it becomes excessive, measures are taken to reduce the consumption of natural resources to a more balanced and manageable level. So nature is actually exhibiting a profound intelligence, but at the same time, it clearly has no ego, because no single species takes precedence over any other. That only tends to happen when people get involved and engage in practices that are just completely misaligned with natural rhythms and cycles. The energy of nature encompasses everything, and it flows in a way that brings stability to the whole, rather than developing preferences like we tend to do. And this is precisely where we are at error as a species, because we don't moderate our own behavior. The egocentric illusion of separateness that we cling onto has convinced us that we can just consume and destroy with impunity, but not just in terms of pollution or deforestation, plant and animal species extinction, or poverty and war with other people, but also in terms of the shit food that we eat, the addictive drugs and stimulants that we consume, and the kind of mind-numbing, repetitive media that we're so engrossed in. It's like I said a moment ago, nature enjoys a certain degree of leeway, but it knows when certain behavior crosses the threshold from sustainable to destructive. So there is balance and there is stability, and within that there is harmony, and we could learn a lot from that. It's funny how the very things that we're so addicted to propagate and enforce this notion that we have of separation from the nature that surrounds and permeates us. Yet if we could just force ourselves to turn off the computer just for a while, to drop the to-do list and all of the hyper-productivity that's just now so commonplace, our awareness suddenly recognizes the world around us, and we can see and we can feel that the world is actually vast and it's full of mystery. Science is so useful, but as a standalone lens for perceiving the world around us, it can be quite cold and one-sided. And I really do think that emotional warmth is needed if we're going to live harmoniously with our natural surroundings. Now, this doesn't mean anthropomorphizing nature, but the trees, the plants, the animals, the fungi, the soil, the ocean, all of these things constitute an interconnected and interdependent matrix of living awareness. We're really not separate from the rhythm of nature at all. We just behave as though we are. shutting ourselves off from the natural world that surrounds us by constantly staring at screens and trying to connect with nature through an online medium. Videos about nature won't suffice. Nature's not inside a screen. It's here. It's all around us and it's inside of us and it can heal us. And the way that nature regulates itself is something that I think we can all learn from, because we can begin moderating our own addictive behavior and open ourselves to the balance and wisdom that surrounds and permeates us.